Welcome back to Night Visitors. Tonight, we're sharing 6 most disturbing true Alaskan Ranger horror stories that will make you never trust the wilderness again. What happens when the animals you're counting start appearing in 2 places at once? What do you do when you meet yourself working alone on a trail deep in the forest? And what's really watching you from the trees when you think you're completely alone? These aren't made-up stories. Real park rangers with years of experience lived through these nightmares in Alaska's frozen wilderness, and what they found out there changed them forever. If you're new here, subscribe to Night Visitors right now because we bring you the scariest true stories that actually happened. Hit that bell so you never miss when we post something new. But I'm warning you, after hearing what happened to these rangers, you might never want to go hiking alone again. So, turn off the lights, get comfortable, and let's find out what's really hiding in the darkness of Alaska's woods. My name is Dave Morrison, and I've been a wildlife census ranger at Denali National Park for 8 years. My job is pretty simple. I count animals and track their populations so scientists can understand how wildlife is doing in Alaska. I've hiked thousands of miles through some of the most beautiful and dangerous wilderness in America. I've been charged by grizzly bears, caught in sudden blizzards, and once spent 3 days lost in a whiteout. But I love this work because every day I get to see nature at its most wild and honest. I specialize in large mammal counts, especially moose, caribou, and bear populations. The Park Service depends on my reports to make decisions about hunting permits, tourist safety, and conservation efforts. I carry a GPS unit, a high-end camera with telephoto lens, and a satellite radio for emergencies. Most days, I'm completely alone in areas where the nearest human might be 50 miles away. You learn to trust your equipment and your training when you're that isolated. What happened last September in Sector 7 changed everything I thought I knew about wildlife behavior. And I'm not even sure I believe what I'm about to tell you, but I have photos and GPS data that prove every word of it. It was September 15th when I got the assignment for the annual moose count in Sector 7. This was routine work, a 15-mile circuit through mixed forest and meadowland that I'd done dozens of times before. The weather was perfect, clear skies and cool temperatures, exactly what you want for a long day of hiking and photography. Sector 7 sits in a valley between 2 ridgelines, with a small creek running through the middle. There's an old logging road that makes the first few miles easy walking, then you're on game trails and your own navigation skills. The area usually supports about 15 to 20 moose, mostly cows with calves and a few bachelor bulls. It's good habitat, plenty of willow brush for food and water access year-round. I started before dawn, like always. My equipment was running perfectly. GPS showing clear satellite connection, camera batteries fully charged, and my radio checking in crystal clear with park headquarters. My supervisor Janet wished me luck and reminded me that the State Wildlife Department was especially interested in this year's numbers. There'd been some concern about declining moose populations statewide. The first mile along the old logging road was completely normal. I saw the usual signs: fresh moose droppings, some browsing damage on young willows, a few old rubs on aspen trees. My camera was ready, and I was feeling good about getting some solid documentation for what I hoped would be encouraging population numbers. That's when I saw the first group. Right at the 1-mile marker, I spotted 3 moose in a meadow about 100 yards off the trail. A large bull with the impressive rack, and 2 younger animals grazing nearby. I immediately raised my camera and started taking photos, noting the GPS coordinates automatically embedded in each image. The bull was magnificent, probably 8 feet tall at the shoulder, with antlers that had to span 6 feet. But here's what struck me as unusual. In 8 years of doing these counts, I rarely saw more than 1 or 2 moose in the first mile. These 3 looked incredibly healthy, well-fed, and completely unbothered by my presence. Normally, moose are pretty skittish and will move off when they detect humans. I radioed the sighting to Janet. "Base, this is Dave. 1 mile in and I've already got 3 moose, including a really impressive bull. They look great." "That's fantastic news, Dave," Janet replied. "We could really use some positive numbers this year." I continued down the trail, feeling optimistic. At mile 2, I found 4 more moose near the creek, a cow with twin calves and another young bull. Again, they seemed completely unbothered by my presence and looked remarkably healthy. I took detailed photos and marked the GPS coordinates. By mile 3, I'd counted 6 more moose. This was incredible. In a normal year, I might see 8 or 10 moose total in the entire 15-mile circuit. I was already up to 13 animals and had barely started the survey. At the halfway point, around noon, I stopped for lunch and reviewed my photos. The count was now at 28 moose, nearly triple what I'd ever recorded in Sector 7. Every animal looked perfect: glossy coats, good body weight, alert and active. If these numbers held up, it would represent the biggest population recovery in the park's history. I called Janet with the update. She was ecstatic. "Dave, this is amazing. The state is going to be thrilled. Make sure you're getting GPS coordinates for everything." "Already on it," I told her. "Every photo is automatically tagged with exact location data." That's when I decided to take a closer look at the photos I'd already taken. Something was bothering me about the images, so I started comparing them more carefully on my camera's LCD screen. Several of the moose looked remarkably similar. Not just similar in the way that moose of the same age and sex can look alike, but identical. Same scars, same antler patterns, same distinctive markings. At first, I figured I'd accidentally photographed the same animals twice as they moved around the area. Moose can cover a lot of ground, and it's possible to encounter the same animal multiple times during a long survey. But when I checked the GPS coordinates embedded in each photo, I discovered something impossible. I had photos of the same individual bull moose taken 3 miles apart, within 30 minutes of each other. The timestamps and GPS data were clear. There was no way a moose could have traveled that distance in that time through dense forest. I started examining every photo more carefully. That's when I realized the horrible truth. I wasn't seeing 28 different moose. I was seeing the same 12 animals over and over again. The magnificent bull from mile 1 was identical to bulls I'd photographed at miles 4, 7, and 10. Not similar, identical. Same broken tine on the left antler, same scar pattern on the right shoulder, same distinctive white patch on the muzzle. The cow with twin calves appeared in photos from 5 different locations, each time nursing the same 2 calves in exactly the same position. A young bull with a distinctive bend in his right antler showed up at 6 different spots along my route. I sat there, staring at my camera screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The GPS coordinates didn't lie. The timestamps were accurate, but the evidence suggested that 12 moose were somehow appearing in multiple locations simultaneously. My hands started shaking as I scrolled through the photos again. Every different group I'd encountered was actually the same 12 animals, positioned and behaving exactly the same way at each location. I decided to test my theory. Instead of continuing forward on my planned route, I hiked back toward the area where I'd seen the first group of moose. If these were real animals, they'd either still be there or have moved to different locations. They were still there, exactly where I'd left them 3 hours earlier. The same bull, standing in the same spot, his head raised at the same angle, looking in the same direction. The 2 younger animals were in identical positions, one browsing willows, the other drinking from the stream. It was like looking at a photograph that had come to life. I took more pictures, then hiked quickly to the location where I'd seen the cow with calves. She was there too, in exactly the same position, nursing her young at exactly the same angle. When I checked my watch and timed the behavior, she was nursing for precisely 4 minutes and 20 seconds before lifting her head to scan for danger. The same duration I'd observed hours earlier. My radio crackled. "Dave, this is base. How's the count going?" I stared at the impossible scene in front of me. "Janet, I need you to hike out here. Bring the backup GPS unit and a camera." "Is everything okay? You sound strange." "I'm fine, but I need someone else to witness what I'm seeing. There's something happening here that doesn't make sense." It took Janet 2 hours to reach my location. When she arrived, I walked her through my discovery, showing her the photos and GPS data. At first, she was skeptical, suggesting equipment malfunction or user error. But when I took her to see the moose in person, her skepticism evaporated. We spent the next 4 hours documenting the phenomenon. The same 12 moose appeared at predictable intervals along the hiking route, always in the same positions, always exhibiting identical behaviors. Every 37 minutes, they would cycle through their locations like actors following a script. The large bull would always be found eating grass near the old logging road. The cow with calves was always nursing by the creek. A yearling bull was always rubbing his antlers on a specific aspen tree. Every time, every location, every cycle. "Dave," Janet whispered as we watched the yearling bull rub his antlers on empty air where no tree existed. "These aren't real animals." We documented everything: GPS coordinates, timestamps, behavior patterns, photographic evidence. The phenomenon was absolutely consistent: 12 moose, following a precise schedule, appearing and disappearing like clockwork across a 15-mile area. When we returned to headquarters, Janet immediately contacted the regional wildlife office. Within a week, researchers from 3 universities had arrived to study what the media was calling the Denali 12. For a month, scientists documented the moose appearing on schedule. They set up motion cameras, employed infrared sensors, even brought in equipment to detect electromagnetic anomalies. The pattern never varied. Same 12 animals, same behaviors, same impossible schedule. I became famous in the wildlife community overnight. Research papers were written about the discovery. I was invited to speak at conferences and featured in National Geographic. My career was made. But we all noticed the phenomenon was breaking down. At first, the changes were subtle. The moose would appear a few seconds late or in positions slightly different from their usual spots. Then the variations became more obvious. The bull would stand motionless instead of grazing. The cow would go through the motions of nursing, but her calves weren't there anymore. The yearling continued rubbing his antlers, but now we could see he was rubbing against nothing, just empty air where a tree should have been. Dr. Sarah Chen, the lead researcher from UC Davis, pulled me aside during the 3rd week. "Dave, I need to show you something we found in the historical records." She handed me a file folder marked Confidential, Park Service, Internal Use Only. Exactly 1 year ago, 12 moose died in Sector 7 from a hemorrhagic disease outbreak. The Park Service kept it quiet to avoid panic about the water supply. The dead animals were removed and incinerated to prevent spread of infection. I stared at the report, comparing the descriptions of the dead animals to my photographs. Same distinctive markings, same scars and antler patterns, same individual animals. "What you discovered," Dr. Chen continued, "wasn't a population recovery. It was some kind of ecological memory. The forest was replaying the last day these animals were alive, over and over again." As the temporal loop continued to degrade, the ghost moose became obviously unnatural. They walked through trees, drank from dry ground, and grazed on grass that existed only in their memory. Scientists documented them, becoming increasingly transparent, their images fading like old photographs. On the final day of the phenomenon, I watched all 12 moose gather in a clearing at sunset. One by one, they faded away like mist, finally accepting their death. The last to disappear was the magnificent bull, who turned and looked directly at me before vanishing completely. Since then, the moose population in Sector 7 has been 0. No real animals will enter the area. It's like they sensed something wrong about the place where 12 of their kind got trapped between life and death. My wildlife count that year showed the highest moose numbers on record, followed immediately by complete absence. The success launched my career, earning me promotions and recognition throughout the wildlife management community. But I'll never forget that the animals I saved were already dead. I still patrol Sector 7 as part of my regular duties. It remains empty except for the occasional translucent shape moving through the trees, a reminder that nature sometimes refuses to let go of what it's lost. Sometimes late at night, when I'm reviewing my photos from that September, I wonder if the forest is still trying to bring them back. And I wonder what would happen if it succeeded. I've never reported seeing the transparent moose in my official counts. Some discoveries are too dangerous to share, but if you're ever hiking in Denali and you see moose that seem too perfect, too healthy, too predictable in their behavior, check your GPS coordinates twice. Because sometimes, the wildlife we're counting is still counting us back. My name is Mike Henderson, and I've been a trail maintenance specialist for the National Forest Service for 12 years. I keep hiking paths safe and clear for the thousands of people who visit our forests every year. I've repaired bridges washed out by flash floods, cleared trees after ice storms, and rebuilt entire trail sections after landslides. I've worked alone in grizzly country, rappelled down cliffs to fix damaged markers, and spent weeks in the backcountry with nothing but my tools and radio for company. But what happened last month on the Glacier View Trail changed everything I thought I knew about working alone in the wilderness. Because sometimes, when you spend enough time by yourself in the forest, you discover you're not really alone at all. It was early October when my supervisor, Janet, called me into her office. A massive windstorm had torn through the Glacier View Trail the week before, and she needed someone to assess and repair the damage. The trail runs 20 miles through some of the most remote wilderness in our district. It's beautiful country, but it only sees maybe 10 hikers a year because of how hard it is to reach. Should be straightforward work, Janet said, sliding the damage report across her desk. Fallen trees blocking the path, a couple wooden bridges need repair, and some trail markers got knocked down. Weather forecast looks good for the next week. I reviewed the list. Standard stuff, chainsaw work, basic carpentry, some paint and hardware. Nothing I hadn't done 100 times before. How long do I have? Take a week. Camp at the old ranger station cabin near mile marker 8. There's a hand pump for water and a fire ring. You'll have radio contact twice daily, morning and evening check-ins. I loaded my truck with everything I'd need. Chainsaw, extra chains, 2-stroke oil, lumber for bridge repairs, galvanized bolts, trail markers, paint, brushes. My camping gear fit in one large pack. Sleeping bag, tarp, cooking supplies, first aid kit. After 12 years, I had the supply list memorized. The drive to the trailhead took 3 hours on increasingly rough forest roads. The last 10 miles were gravel, winding through dense pine forest that seemed to close in around my truck. When I reached the trailhead parking area, there was only one other vehicle, a rusty pickup that had probably been there for weeks. I shouldered my 70-pound pack and started hiking. The first 8 miles to the cabin would take most of the day with all my gear. The trail was in decent shape initially, but I could see storm damage ahead, broken branches scattered across the path, a few smaller trees down that I'd deal with on the way back. The old ranger cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by towering Douglas firs. It was basic but solid, one room with a wood stove, table, chair, and bunk bed. Someone had left a stack of seasoned firewood under the eaves. The hand pump worked fine, bringing up clear, cold water that tasted like nothing but mountain minerals. I set up my gear and radioed headquarters for my evening check-in. Janet's voice crackled through the static. "How's it looking up there, Mike?" "Good so far. Cabin's in decent shape. I'll start on the trail work tomorrow morning." "Copy that. Remember, morning and evening check-ins. Weather's supposed to stay clear all week." That first night was perfect. I cooked a simple dinner on my camp stove, then sat by the fire listening to the forest settle into darkness. Owls calling, branches creaking in the light wind, the distant sound of a creek. After working in busy areas all summer, the complete silence was exactly what I needed. I started early the next morning, working my way up the trail with my chainsaw. The storm damage was worse than the report suggested. Massive trees had fallen across the path, their root systems torn from the earth. Some were too big to cut through, so I had to clear alternate routes around them. The work was satisfying. There's something peaceful about chainsaw work when you're alone. The steady rhythm, the smell of sawdust, the immediate visual progress. By noon, I'd cleared almost a mile of trail. I took a break, eating lunch while sitting on a fallen log, enjoying the mountain views. The afternoon was bridge repair. 2 wooden footbridges had damaged railings and loose planks. I replaced the broken boards with the lumber I'd brought, drilling new holes and securing everything with galvanized bolts. Not fancy work, but solid and safe. That evening, I radioed in my progress. Day 1 complete. Cleared about a mile of trail, fixed 2 bridges. Should be ahead of schedule. "Sounds good, Mike. Any problems?" "None at all. Beautiful country up here." The second and third days followed the same pattern. Clear fallen trees, repair bridges, replace damaged trail markers. The weather stayed perfect. Clear skies, temperatures in the 60s during the day, cool but not cold at night. I was making excellent progress, feeling good about the quality of my work. By the end of day 3, I'd completed almost half the trail. The repairs were solid, the markers properly aligned and painted. I felt proud of what I'd accomplished. Working alone lets you take your time, do things right without rushing to keep up with a crew. Day 4 started the same way. I hiked to where I'd left off the previous afternoon, ready to tackle a section where several large trees had created a complex tangle of blocked trail. But when I got there, the work was already done. The trees had been cut and cleared, the sections stacked neatly off the trail. The cuts were clean, professional. Someone had even raked the sawdust and wood chips away from the path. It looked better than my own work. I stood there staring at the cleared trail, trying to make sense of it. Maybe another crew had been sent to help? But Janet would have told me. I walked further up the trail and found more completed work. A bridge I'd planned to repair that day had been fixed. Not just fixed, improved. The railings were perfectly aligned, the hardware was better quality than what I'd brought, and someone had even applied a coat of wood preservative. I pulled out my radio. "Base, this is Mike. I need to check something." Janet's voice came through clearly. "Go ahead, Mike. Are there any other maintenance crews working in my area? Someone's been doing trail work overnight." "Negative. You're the only person assigned to that trail for the entire month. Why?" I described what I'd found. Janet was quiet for a moment. "That's strange. Maybe some volunteers? Sometimes experienced hikers will do minor trail maintenance. This isn't minor work. Professional quality repairs, better than what I would have done." "Well, I guess you're getting some free help. Just document everything for the report." I spent the rest of the day checking my previous work. Everything I'd repaired had been improved. Bridges were more solid, trail markers were perfectly straight. Even the areas where I'd cleared fallen trees looked neater. Whoever was helping me knew what they were doing. That night, I stayed awake listening. Around midnight, I heard the distant sound of a chainsaw, then hammering, the whine of a drill. Someone was working on tomorrow's section of trail. I grabbed my flashlight and hiked toward the sounds, but they stopped as soon as I left the cabin area. When I reached the worksite, I found an entire day's worth of repairs completed. A damaged section of trail that would have taken me 8 hours was perfectly fixed. The work was incredible, professional carpentry, perfectly aligned, using techniques I'd never seen before. I called out into the dark forest. "Hello? I want to thank you for the help." My voice echoed off the trees, but no one answered. The next morning, I found a thermos of hot coffee and a wrapped sandwich waiting at my worksite. The coffee was exactly how I like it, strong, with just a little sugar. The sandwich was roast beef and cheese, the kind of real food you crave after days of camping meals. A note was attached. "Keep up the good work, Mike. You're doing great out here." The handwriting looked familiar, but I couldn't place it. Block letters, neat and precise. The kind of writing you see on official reports. I decided to try something. Instead of working on the obvious damaged areas, I hiked to a section further up the trail. If someone was following behind me, maybe I could get ahead of them and figure out who was helping. Around noon, I quietly hiked back toward my starting point. That's when I saw him. Someone in a Forest Service uniform was working on the trail. Same green shirt and pants I was wearing, same tool belt, even the same model chainsaw. He worked with smooth, efficient movements, like someone who'd been doing this job for years. But as I got closer, I realized something impossible. The person working was me. Same height, same build, same way of moving. When he turned around, I was looking at my own face. The other Mike saw me watching and waved. He finished cutting through a fallen tree, turned off his chainsaw, and walked over to where I was standing. "You're doing a good job watching me work," he said with my voice. I stared at my own face, unable to speak. The other Mike smiled. "Don't worry. This happens sometimes." "What happens sometimes?" I managed to ask. "When rangers work alone for extended periods, sometimes they split in two. One version does the physical work, while the other version observes and learns. It's how rangers become truly excellent at their jobs." He explained it like it was the most normal thing in the world. Like seeing yourself working on a trail was just part of the job. "I've been improving your repairs because I have access to skills you've forgotten you learned. Techniques from training courses you took years ago, methods you've seen other crews use. When you're alone like this, your mind can access all that knowledge." "This isn't real," I said. "I'm having some kind of breakdown." The other Mike laughed. "Does it matter? The work is getting done perfectly, better than either of us could do alone." For the next 2 days, I worked alongside myself. The other Mike showed me carpentry techniques I didn't remember learning, ways to align trail markers that made them look professional. methods for clearing trees that were faster and safer than what I'd been doing. We worked as a team. I'd start on one end of a damaged section while he worked from the other end. We'd meet in the middle, and somehow our work always matched up perfectly. No gaps, no overlaps, everything flowing together like we'd planned it. The quality of our repairs was incredible. Bridges that would last decades, trail markers that looked like they belonged in a park brochure. We completed the entire trail repair project in half the expected time. On my last night, the other Mike sat across from me at the campfire. "I'm going to miss working together," he said. "What happens now?" "You go back to your regular life. I stay here." "Stay here?" "The forest needs someone to maintain the trail year-round, not just the big repairs, but the daily maintenance. Keeping water bars clear, adjusting markers as trees grow, making sure the bridges stay solid." He explained that every trail system has someone like him. Rangers who decided to stay permanently, to dedicate themselves completely to keeping the wilderness accessible and safe. "You'll go back to your regular job, work on other trails, but you'll do better work now. You'll remember what I taught you." In the morning, I packed up to leave. The other Mike helped me carry my gear to the trailhead. At the forest edge, where the wilderness ended and the parking area began, he handed me a business card. It had my name on it, with a phone number I'd never seen before. "Call me if you need help," he said. I hiked out alone, leaving my other self standing at the edge of the forest. When I got back to headquarters, I submitted the most successful trail repair report of my career. Janet was amazed at the before and after photos, the detailed documentation of improvements, the speed and quality of the work. "This is exceptional work, Mike. How did you manage to complete everything so quickly?" "I had some help," I said. "From who?" "I thought you were alone up there." "I was. But sometimes, being alone means you discover parts of yourself you didn't know existed." Janet looked at me strangely, but didn't ask for clarification. "That was 6 weeks ago. I've been back to work on other trails since then, but something's different. I find myself using techniques I don't remember learning, solving problems with methods that feel both new and familiar. Sometimes when I'm working alone on remote trails, I find evidence that someone else was there. Perfect repairs that I don't remember making, tools organized better than I left them, work completed overnight that I hadn't planned to start for days." I still have the business card. Sometimes, when I'm facing a particularly challenging repair job, I'm tempted to call the number. Because the truth is, I do my best work when I'm working with myself. Last week, a new ranger asked me for advice about working alone in the backcountry. "Don't you get lonely?" she asked. I thought about the question seriously before answering. "No," I told her. "You're never really alone out there. The forest has a way of providing exactly the help you need when you need it most." She looked puzzled, but she'll understand eventually. When you spend enough time alone in the wilderness, you learn that solitude isn't about being by yourself. It's about discovering all the different versions of yourself that exist and learning to work with them. The work gets done. That's what matters. And it gets done better than you ever imagined possible, even if you can't always explain how. My name is Lisa Martinez, and I've been a Visitor Services Ranger at Denali National Park for 12 years. I coordinate everything tourists need for safe, amazing experiences in Alaska's wilderness. Group tours, safety briefings, wildlife viewing schedules, meal planning, bus routes, etc. If visitors need it, I make it happen. I've handled everything from lost hikers to bear encounters to equipment failures in -40 weather. But what happened last summer during our biggest tour of the season changed everything I thought I knew about time itself. I should tell you that coordinating visitor services isn't just about handing out maps and smiling. When you're responsible for hundreds of people in wilderness that can kill you in a dozen different ways, every detail matters. Radio frequencies, emergency medical protocols, wildlife safety distances, weather monitoring systems, SP. One mistake and people die. The Park Service trusts me with their most challenging groups because I've never lost a visitor or had a serious incident on my watch. Last July, I got assigned the cruise ship tour. 200 passengers from the Times Northern Star Times wanted the full Denali experience in one day. This wasn't some casual hiking group. These were families who'd saved for years, elderly couples on their dream vacation, professional photographers, nature lovers who'd traveled from around the world. They wanted guaranteed wildlife sightings, perfect photo opportunities, and stories to tell for the rest of their lives. I spent 3 weeks planning every minute. 12 charter buses, 6 expert guides, precise timing for wildlife viewing windows, catered lunches, portable restrooms, first aid stations. I coordinated with the wildlife research team to identify the best current animal locations. Bear Valley for grizzlies, Moose Meadow for the family that grazed there every afternoon, Eagle Point, where the bald eagles nested. I even checked wind patterns to ensure optimal photography. Lighting. The visitor center was buzzing that morning. My radio crackled with check-ins from bus drivers, guides updating wildlife positions, kitchen staff confirming lunch deliveries. Everything ran like clockwork. I'd done hundreds of these tours, but never one this large or important. The cruise line was considering making Denali a regular stop if this went well. Jobs were on the line. At 8 a.m. sharp, 12 blue charter buses rolled into our parking area. The passengers stepped off looking exactly like you'd expect. Camera bags, hiking boots, excitement on their faces. Families helped grandparents down the bus steps. Kids pressed against windows, pointing at everything. I gathered everyone at the outdoor amphitheater for the safety briefing. "Welcome to Denali National Park," I announced over the portable sound system. "I'm Lisa, your visitor services coordinator. For the next 8 hours, you're going to see Alaska like few people ever do." I explained bear safety, staying with groups, emergency signals, and our planned route. 4 stops, 2 hours each, with the best wildlife viewing in the park. I distributed maps showing our exact locations and timing. Everyone seemed ready for adventure. At 9 a.m., our convoy pulled out, 12 buses following my lead vehicle through the park road. The morning was perfect. Clear skies, calm wind, 65 degrees. My radio buzzed with updates from our advanced scout, confirming animals were positioned exactly where we needed them. Bear Valley was our first stop. The elevated viewing platforms could safely hold all 200 visitors while they watched grizzlies fish in the river below. As our buses parked, I couldn't believe our luck. Dozens of bears were scattered along the riverbank, adults catching salmon, cubs playing, mothers teaching fishing techniques. "This is incredible timing," radioed Jake, our lead wildlife guide. "I've never seen this many bears in one location." The tourists went crazy. Cameras clicked constantly. Families posed for selfies with grizzlies in the background. Professional photographers set up tripods and long lenses. Every bear seemed to know exactly where to position for the best shots. They'd catch fish, look toward the platforms, hold poses for 30 seconds, then move to different spots. After exactly 2 hours, I called everyone back to the buses. We stayed perfectly on schedule heading to Moose Meadow. Again, the timing was impossible. A family of 5 moose, 2 adults and 3 calves, grazed in the center of the meadow as if they'd been waiting for us. For 30 minutes, they stayed in perfect viewing position. The calves played while adults ate grass. Tourists got close-up photos and videos. Everyone was amazed by how cooperative the wildlife seemed. "It's like they're performing for us," laughed an elderly woman from Detroit. Eagle Point delivered the same perfect experience. 6 bald eagles circled overhead, diving and soaring in formation. They perched on dead trees at just the right distance for photography. Kids counted eagles while parents filmed videos. The timing was so perfect that I started feeling proud of my coordination skills. "You've arranged the most incredible wildlife tour I've ever experienced," said the cruise ship's tour director. "Our passengers are getting their money's worth and more." At our 4th stop, Mountain View Overlook, I noticed something strange. While helping tourists off our buses, I spotted other tour groups at the same viewing areas we'd just visited. I could see buses parked at Bear Valley, Moose Meadow, and Eagle Point, EVT, buses that looked exactly like ours. I grabbed my binoculars and focused on the distant groups. There were definitely other tourists at our previous stops, but something was wrong with their appearance. The clothing styles looked different. Some groups wore bright windbreakers and used cameras that seemed bulky and outdated. Others had sleek, modern gear I didn't recognize. "Jake, do you see those other tour groups?" I radioed our lead guide. "Copy that, Lisa. I count 12 buses at each location, same as ours. Must be a busy day for tourism." but I'd checked the schedule that morning. We were the only large group booked for today. The Park Service coordinates all major tours to prevent overcrowding and ensure wildlife safety. There shouldn't be other groups at our designated spots. I called the visitor center on my radio. This is Lisa with the cruise ship tour. Can you confirm other groups are scheduled for Bear Valley, Moose Meadow, and Eagle Point today? Static filled my earpiece for several seconds. Then, negative, Lisa. You have exclusive access to all 4 locations until 5 p.m. No other groups scheduled. Through my binoculars, I watched tourists at Bear Valley taking photos of the same bears we'd seen hours earlier. The bears were still performing, still posing, still timing their movements perfectly for cameras. A family of moose remained in the exact center of Moose Meadow, while a different group of 200 tourists watched them graze. Something's not right, I told Jake over the radio. Those groups weren't there when we left. Maybe they're Park Service research teams, Jake suggested. But research teams don't travel in 12 charter buses with hundreds of tourists. And they definitely don't dress like families on vacation from different decades. At Mountain View Overlook, our tourists spread across the scenic platforms for panoramic photos of the Alaska Range. I kept watching the distant groups through binoculars, trying to understand what I was seeing. The bears at Bear Valley hadn't moved. They were still catching salmon, still posing for photos, still performing for tourists. But now it was a different group of tourists watching them. The moose family grazed in the exact same positions, while new visitors took the same photos we'd taken 2 hours earlier. I radioed our other guides. Can everyone confirm what you're seeing at our previous stops? Sarah at Bus 7 responded first. I see tour groups at all 3 locations. They look like they're from different time periods based on their clothing and camera equipment. Tom from Bus 12 added, the group at Eagle Point is wearing styles from maybe the 1990 seconds, and their buses look older than ours. Mike from Bus 3 said, Bear Valley group has 1980 seconds windbreakers and those big camcorders from back then. But the bears are doing the exact same performance we saw this morning. I felt cold despite the warm afternoon. The wildlife wasn't just cooperating with our tour, 1999. They were performing the same routine for multiple groups simultaneously. Groups that shouldn't exist. Our tourists started noticing the other groups too. They pointed and waved at the distant figures. Some used telephoto lenses to photograph the historical reenactors they assumed I'd arranged as part of the experience. Lisa, this is amazing, called out Mrs. Patterson, a retired teacher from Florida. How did you coordinate all these period-accurate tour groups? It's like watching Denali's tourism history. I had to make a decision. Tell 200 excited tourists that something impossible was happening, or play along and keep everyone calm. It's a special historical education component, I announced over my portable speaker. You're seeing how tourism has evolved at Denali over the decades. The explanation worked perfectly. Our group was thrilled to be part of what they thought was an elaborate educational program. They took photos of themselves, with the time period groups in the background. Everyone assumed I'd arranged the most innovative tour experience in Alaska. But I knew the truth. Those weren't reenactors. They were real tour groups from different decades, all visiting the same locations at the same time. And the wildlife was somehow performing for all of them. As we prepared to leave Mountain View Overlook, I saw something that made my blood freeze. In the distance, at a viewing area we hadn't visited yet, I could see our own 12 blue buses parked in formation. I counted carefully, 12 buses identical to ours, with tourists in modern clothing that matched what our group was wearing. I was looking at my own tour group at a location we hadn't reached yet. Jake, do you see our buses at Glacier Viewpoint? I radioed. Confirmed. 12 blue buses, large tourist group. But we're scheduled to arrive there in 2 hours. Through binoculars, I watched tourists who looked exactly like our passengers taking photos at Glacier Viewpoint. I could see families, elderly couples, photographers, the same mix of people who were currently standing next to me at Mountain View Overlook. I understood what was happening. We weren't just sharing space with tour groups from the past. We were seeing tour groups from the future too. Groups that hadn't happened yet, but would happen, using the exact same schedule I'd created. The wildlife at every location was performing for an endless stream of tour groups across time. The bears would catch salmon for the 1980 seconds group. then immediately catch more salmon for the 1,990 seconds group, then do it again for our 2023 group, then repeat for future groups I could see in the distance. Our tourists boarded the buses for our final stop, completely satisfied with their historical tourism experience. They chatted excitedly about the innovative program I'd supposedly arranged. Several asked if they could book the same tour next year. At Glacier Viewpoint, we found the area empty despite what I'd seen through binoculars. Our group spread out to photograph the massive glacier and surrounding peaks. But I kept watching for signs of other tour groups, other time periods, other versions of ourselves. 20 minutes into our stop, I spotted them. In the distance, I could see our own convoy approaching Glacier Viewpoint, HLBIC, 12 blue buses that looked exactly like ours. As they got closer, I realized I was watching myself lead the same tour group to the same location. Through binoculars, I saw myself step off the lead bus, gather tourists around me, and begin the same glacier explanation I'd given thousands of times. I was watching my own tour from 2 hours in the future, happening simultaneously with our current visit. We returned to the visitor center as scheduled. The cruise ship passengers rated it the best tour of their Alaska vacation. Several asked for my business card to recommend the experience to friends. The cruise ship tour director shook my hand and said they'd definitely make Denali a regular stop. I submitted my daily report that evening. Most successful large group coordination in park history. Perfect wildlife viewing, excellent weather, 0 incidents, outstanding visitor satisfaction. But when I checked my schedule the next morning, something was wrong. My computer showed the same tour scheduled for the same day with the same 200 cruise ship passengers. According to the system, today was July 15th, the same date as yesterday's tour. I called the visitor center. "This is Lisa. There seems to be a scheduling error. The cruise ship tour is showing as today, but we completed it yesterday." "No error, Lisa," replied the dispatch coordinator. "The Times Northern Star Times tour is scheduled for today. 200 passengers, same itinerary you planned." I drove to work confused. Maybe the computer system had glitched. But when I arrived, 12 blue charter buses were parked in the same positions as yesterday. The same 200 tourists stood around the amphitheater, same families, same elderly couples, same photographers. I gave the same safety briefing, distributed the same maps, led the same convoy to the same 4 stops. The bears performed perfectly at Bear Valley. The moose family grazed in Moose Meadow. The eagles soared at Eagle Point. Every tourist was thrilled with their unique experience. But I could see other tour groups at every location. 1,000 groups from the 1,980 seconds, 1,990 seconds, early 2000s, and future decades I couldn't identify. All following the same perfect itinerary, all getting the same amazing wildlife viewing, all leaving with the same outstanding reviews. That was 3 months ago, and I've given the same tour every day since. 200 cruise ship passengers, 12 blue buses, 4 perfect wildlife viewing stops. The tourists are always amazed by the innovative historical education component when they see other tour groups from different time periods. I've tried changing the schedule, taking different routes, canceling tours. But every morning, my computer shows the same July 15th cruise ship tour. The same buses arrive with the same passengers who expect the same perfect experience. Sometimes I see myself from previous tours waving from other buses in the convoy. My past and future selves, all leading the same group to the same locations. We've become part of the permanent wildlife show, not just the bears and moose and eagles, but the tour coordinators and guides and tourists too. The visitors always leave with perfect reviews. They tell everyone about the best wildlife tour in Alaska, the innovative historical program, the incredible coordination. I'm the most successful visitor services coordinator in park history, but I'll never coordinate anything new again. Just this one perfect tour, with the same perfect wildlife viewing, the same perfect timing, the same perfect reviews. Forever. If you're ever planning a cruise to Alaska, and they offer you a tour of Denali with guaranteed wildlife sightings and historical education components, know that you'll have an amazing time. The bears will pose perfectly, the moose will graze peacefully, the eagles will soar on command. Just remember that some performances never end, and some coordinators never get to plan anything new. Sometimes being too good at your job means you'll be doing it forever. My name is Marcus Thompson, and I've been a wildlife survey specialist for the National Park Service for 12 years. I track animal populations and migration patterns across Alaska's most remote wilderness areas. I've spent countless nights alone in grizzly territory, survived 3 blizzards, and documented species that most people only see in nature documentaries. My job takes me to places where cell phones don't work, and the nearest human being might be 100 miles away. But what happened last November in Sector 12 of Denali National Park changed everything I thought I knew about what lives in our wilderness. There are things out there that aren't in any field guide. The assignment seemed routine when I got it. Winter deer population survey in Sector 12, about 30 miles northeast of the main park road. This is standard conservation work, ATE. Set up trail cameras, count tracks in the snow, estimate herd sizes for our annual wildlife reports. The data helps us understand how deer populations survive Alaska's brutal winters and whether hunting quotas need adjustment. I'd surveyed Sector 12 twice before, always in summer. It's beautiful but isolated country. Thick spruce forests, frozen streams, and rolling hills that stretch to the horizon. The only way in during winter is by snowmobile, following old mining trails that barely qualify as paths. No cell service, no radio contact except with my high-power base station, and definitely no other people. I loaded my gear on November 15th. 12 trail cameras, GPS units, emergency beacon, camping equipment rated for -40, and enough food for 5 days. My snowmobile was a reliable Yamaha with backup fuel cans strapped to the rack. I've done this kind of solo mission dozens of times. The isolation doesn't bother me. It's actually why I love this job. The weather was perfect when I reached my planned campsite around noon on the first day. Clear skies, light snow, temperature holding steady at -15. I set up my tent in a small clearing surrounded by spruce trees, established my radio base station, and began placing cameras along known deer trails and feeding areas. Everything went exactly as expected that first day. I found plenty of fresh deer tracks in the snow, documented healthy population numbers, and marked locations for my remaining cameras. The tracks showed normal winter behavior, the telno, deer moving between sheltered resting areas and exposed feeding grounds where they could dig through snow for vegetation. I radioed my daily check-in to headquarters at 6 p.m., reported normal findings, and settled in for the night. The forest was peaceful, just wind in the trees and the occasional crack of branches in the cold. I fell asleep confident this would be another successful, routine survey. I woke up the next morning to something that made no sense. Massive footprints in the snow surrounded my campsite. These weren't deer tracks or moose prints or anything I'd ever seen before. They were humanoid, but enormous. At least 18 inches long and 8 inches wide at the ball of the foot. 5 clear toe impressions showed whatever made these tracks was walking upright on 2 legs with a stride length of nearly 6 feet. The prints were fresh from the night before. I could see where the snow had been compressed down to the frozen ground, then partially filled with new snowfall. Whatever made these tracks had walked directly through my camp while I was sleeping, passing within 10 feet of my tent. I grabbed my camera and measuring tape, documenting everything. The depth of the impressions suggested something incredibly heavy, much heavier than a human. But the gait pattern was definitely bipedal, with a deliberate walking rhythm rather than the bounding pattern of animals. I followed the trail for about a mile into the forest. The tracks led to a spot where several large spruce trees formed a natural blind overlooking my campsite. Broken branches 12 feet off the ground showed something massive had been standing there for hours, watching me sleep. That's when I realized these weren't random tracks. Something had been deliberately observing me. I radioed headquarters immediately. My supervisor, Janet Rodriguez, listened as I described the footprints and their location. She asked me to document everything thoroughly: measurements, photographs, GPS coordinates. Janet's been with the Park Service for 20 years and she's seen plenty of unusual things, but I could hear concern in her voice. "Marcus, you said the tracks went through your actual campsite?" "Right past my tent, Janet. Whatever this was came within 10 feet of me while I was sleeping." "Any idea what could make prints that size?" "Nothing I know of. The size suggests something much larger than any known wildlife in this region. She told me to continue the survey, but stay alert. If I found anything else unusual, I was to report immediately. I spent the rest of that day placing my remaining cameras, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Several times I stopped and scanned the tree line, looking for movement or signs of whatever had visited my camp. The forest felt different now, too quiet, like the normal wildlife was avoiding the area. That evening, I double-checked all my equipment and made sure my rifle was loaded and accessible. I'd brought it for bears, but now I wasn't sure what I might need protection from. Around 10 p.m., I heard something moving in the forest. Heavy footsteps crunching through snow, circling my campsite at a distance of maybe 50 yards. The sound was rhythmic and deliberate, definitely not a wandering animal. I grabbed my high-powered flashlight and unzipped my tent. The beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across the trees. For a moment, I saw nothing. Then movement caught my eye about 50 yards to my left. A dark shape was moving between the trees. It was massive, at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark fur, walking upright like a human, but with the bulk and proportions of something much more powerful. When my light hit it, the creature turned toward me. I'll never forget those eyes. They reflected my flashlight beam like an animal's, but they glowed red instead of the typical yellow or green. The creature studied me for about 30 seconds, then made a sound I'd never heard before. A deep growling that seemed to come from multiple throats at once, like several large predators vocalizing together. Then it simply melted back into the forest without a sound. I spent the rest of the night sitting in my tent with my rifle across my knees, listening to footsteps circling my camp. Whatever was out there moved with incredible stealth for something so large. I'd catch glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, but whenever I pointed my flashlight toward the sound, I saw nothing. In the morning, I found tracks everywhere. The creature had approached within 10 feet of my tent during the night. The snow around my campsite was covered with massive handprints where it had been examining my equipment. It had touched my snowmobile, my gear cache, even the outside of my tent. But the most disturbing discovery was what it had done to my trail cameras. Every single camera had been moved. Not damaged or destroyed, but carefully repositioned to point away from the creature's travel routes. Someone or something had understood what the cameras were for and systematically redirected them. When I checked the memory cards, I found that every camera had malfunctioned at exactly 2:47 a.m. Instead of recording whatever had moved them, they showed only static and distorted images that looked like electronic interference. This wasn't random animal behavior, this was intelligence. I continued my survey work, but what I found about the deer population was deeply disturbing. All the deer tracks I'd have been following for 2 days led to a single location, a clearing about 2 miles from my campsite. There were no deer in the clearing. Instead, I found a pile of deer bones picked completely clean. The bones were arranged in a perfect circle about 20 feet across, like some kind of ritual feeding pattern. Fresh tracks showed the massive creature had been bringing deer to this location for weeks. I counted remains from at least 40 deer, far more than any normal predator would kill. The creature wasn't just hunting for food. It was systematically eliminating the entire local deer population. No wonder I'd found so few fresh tracks compared to previous surveys. The bone circle looked deliberate, almost ceremonial. These weren't the random kills of a hungry predator. This was organized behavior with a purpose I couldn't understand. I radioed my findings to headquarters immediately. Janet listened to my report in silence, then told me something that made my blood run cold. "Marcus, I'm ordering you to evacuate Sector 12 immediately. Pack your gear and get out of there now." "Janet, what aren't you telling me?" "We've had reports. Other rangers, researchers, even some of the local bush pilots. Things that don't make sense, just pack up and get back here." As I loaded my gear, I realized I was being watched again. Multiple sets of glowing eyes were visible in the forest surrounding my campsite. This wasn't a single creature. There was an entire pack of them, and they had been coordinating their hunting in that bone circle. I finished packing and walked to my snowmobile. The engine turned over once, then died. I tried again. Nothing. I popped the hood and found that someone had cut specific wires and removed critical engine components. The damage was precise, surgical. These creatures had sabotaged my transportation to keep me in their territory. My hands were shaking as I activated my emergency beacon. The rescue signal would bring help, but the nearest Park Service helicopter was hours away. I had to survive until then. The pack of creatures emerged from the forest in formation. I counted at least 6 of them, all 8 feet tall or larger, moving with coordinated precision. They surrounded my campsite but didn't attack. Instead, they just stood there, studying me like I was a specimen in some kind of field research. The largest one, the same creature I'd seen the night before, approached slowly. It dropped a fresh deer carcass at my feet, like an offering, then stepped back and made a series of low vocalizations that almost sounded like attempts at communication. I realized these weren't just animals. They were intelligent beings trying to make contact. For the next 6 hours, the creatures maintained their positions around my camp. They didn't threaten me or show aggression. Instead, they seemed curious, almost protective. When I moved, they tracked my movements. When I sat still, they relaxed. It was like they were trying to establish some kind of relationship. When I finally heard the rescue helicopter approaching, the creatures immediately began moving back toward the forest. By the time the chopper landed, they had completely vanished, leaving no trace except the deer carcass and the footprints in the snow. The rescue crew found me unharmed but shaken. I told them everything: the tracks, the bone circle, the intelligent behavior, the coordinated pack hunting. They listened without judgment and transported me back to park headquarters. My official report described discovering an unknown species of intelligent humanoid predators in Sector 12. I included all my photographs, GPS coordinates, and detailed observations of their behavior and apparent cognitive abilities. 2 days later, a team of government scientists arrived to investigate. They found nothing. A fresh snowstorm had covered all the tracks, and the bone circle had been scattered by wind. My trail, cameras showed only normal forest activity. The official report listed my encounter as stress-induced hallucinations due to isolation and high-altitude exposure. My 12 years of exemplary service and dozens of successful solo missions were dismissed as irrelevant. But I know what I saw, and so does the Park Service, even if they won't admit it. Deer populations in Sector 12 remain at 0 3 months later. Solo assignments in that area have been permanently discontinued. New protocols require all wildlife surveys north of the main park road to be conducted by teams of at least 3 people, and never during winter months. They can call it hallucinations all they want. But something is living in those forests, something intelligent enough to understand human technology and organized enough to systematically manage wildlife populations in ways we don't comprehend. I still work for the Park Service, but now I stick to populated areas and established trails. Because I know that somewhere in Sector 12, there's a species we haven't cataloged, and they're watching us just as carefully as we try to watch them. The only difference is, they're much better at it than we are. My name is Janet Martinez, and after what happened on Whispering Pines Trail last October, I'll never work with children in the wilderness again. I've been an Alaskan park ranger for 14 years. I've pulled frozen bodies from crevasses, tracked down missing hikers eaten by bears, and found campers who died screaming in their tents with no visible cause of death. I thought I'd seen everything Alaska could throw at someone. I was wrong. What I'm about to tell you is in my official incident report, buried in a federal database that civilians will never see. The Park Service classified it as a psychological break due to isolation stress. That's not what happened. What happened was that 30 children almost became part of something ancient and hungry, and I was the one who led them directly to it. October 15th should have been routine. 34th graders from Fairbanks Elementary, 3 teachers, 2 parent volunteers. Standard Alaska Wildlife Discovery Program on the Whispering Pines Trail, a trail I'd walked over 1,000 times in 14 years. But the signs were wrong from the beginning. First, dispatch radio had been crackling with strange interference for 3 days. Mike Torino, our communications tech, said the equipment was picking up voices speaking in what sounded like Athabascan, but the words were wrong. Old dialect mixed with sounds that didn't belong to any human language. Second, Jim Crawford, our senior ranger, had filed a report about animal behavior anomalies in the Whispering Pines area. Wolves hunting in broad daylight, bears gathering in groups of 12 or more, moose standing motionless for hours, facing the same direction like they were listening to something humans couldn't hear. Third, I should have paid attention to my dreams. For a week before the school visit, I'd been dreaming about children walking into the forest and never coming out. In the dreams, I could hear them laughing and calling my name, but when I followed their voices, I found only scattered bones and tiny pieces of clothing hanging from tree branches. I ignored all of it, 14 years of experience, and I ignored every single warning. The morning of October 15th, I loaded my truck with educational materials and drove to the trailhead. The thermometer read 38 degrees, but the air felt colder, like something was sucking the warmth out of the atmosphere. The forest was completely silent. No bird calls, no squirrel chatter, no insect buzzing, just dead, suffocating quiet. I should have called the school and canceled. Instead, I grabbed my radio and called Linda, my supervisor. "Base, this is Ranger Martinez. Weather's clear for the school group. Starting trail setup now." "Copy that, Janet. How's the wildlife activity out there?" I looked at the silent forest surrounding me. "Quiet today. Almost too quiet." "Well, that's better than having bears crashing your presentation," Linda laughed. "Have fun with the kids." As I hiked toward the first education station, carrying my backpack full of laminated photos and measuring equipment, I noticed something that made my stomach clench. Fresh human footprints in the mud beside the trail. Small footprints, child-sized. But no school groups had been here in over a month. At Station 1, where I teach about small mammals, I found the rabbit tracks I'd photographed the day before. But overnight, something had arranged small stones around each track, creating perfect circles, 30 circles total. Exactly the number of children coming on today's field trip. I stared at those stone circles, feeling ice water in my veins. In 14 years, I'd never seen anything like this. Animals don't arrange stones. The local Athabascan tribes have stories about stone circles, but those stories don't end well for anyone who finds them. I pulled out my radio. "Base, this is Martinez. I'm seeing some unusual formations at Station 1. Might want to delay the school group." Static, then Linda's voice, but distorted, like she was speaking from the bottom of a well. "Janet, children are coming. Must be ready." "Linda, you're breaking up." "Say again?" More static, then silence. I tried calling again. Dead air. My radio was working fine. All the indicator lights were green, battery full, signal strength normal. But I couldn't reach anyone. That's when I heard the children laughing. It was coming from deeper in the forest, off the trail. High, bright laughter that echoed strangely among the trees. But the school bus wasn't due for another hour, and there was no other way to access this area. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone out there?" The laughter stopped instantly, like someone had turned off a radio. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. I continued to Station 2, checking my watch obsessively. The children's laughter had sounded so real, so close, but that was impossible. I was alone on the trail. I had to be alone. At Station 2, the bird station, I found dozens of feathers arranged in a perfect spiral pattern around a fallen log. Raven feathers, jay feathers, ptarmigan feathers, and others I couldn't identify. The spiral was about 6 feet across, and in the center was a child's sneaker. Small, maybe size 3, with cartoon characters on the side. My hands shook as I photographed the scene. This wasn't natural. This wasn't coincidence. Something was arranging these displays, and it knew children were coming. I grabbed my radio again, but before I could key the microphone, I heard voices behind me. "Ranger Janet! Ranger Janet, look what we found!" I spun around. 3 children were standing at the edge of the clearing, pointing excitedly at the feather spiral. A boy with red hair, a girl with pigtails, and another boy wearing a jacket too big for him. How you kids doing here?" I demanded. "Where's your teacher? How did you get on the trail?" They just smiled at me. Their eyes were completely black. No iris, no white, just solid black from lid to lid. "We've been waiting for you, Ranger Janet," the girl said in a voice like breaking glass. "We want to learn about the animals." I blinked, and they were gone. Just vanished, like they'd never been there at all. I was losing my mind. 14 years in the Alaskan wilderness, and I was finally cracking up. But I had a job to do. Real children were coming, and I needed to get them through this program safely, even if I was having some kind of breakdown. At Station 3, the bear education area, I found something that almost made me run back to my truck and drive straight to Fairbanks. Fresh bear tracks in the mud, just like I'd seen yesterday. But overnight, someone had filled each track with what looked like black tar. The substance was still wet, still warm, and it smelled like burning flesh and copper pennies. When I leaned closer, I could see tiny bones floating in the tar. Finger bones, tooth fragments, and what looked like pieces of rib cage, child bones. I was photographing the tracks when I heard the school bus pulling into the parking area. The engine noise echoed through the forest, and every tree around me seemed to lean in closer, like they were listening. "No, no, no," I whispered. "I have to stop them. I have to turn them around." I ran back toward the trailhead, crashing through underbrush and stumbling over roots. I could hear the children's voices getting closer, excited chatter and laughter as they prepared for their nature walk. But when I reached the parking area, it was empty. No bus, no children, no teachers. Just my truck, sitting alone under the gray sky. I checked my watch. 10:30 a.m. The group was supposed to arrive at 10. I pulled out my cell phone, but it showed no signal. Even though this area, usually, and had decent coverage. The screen kept flickering, showing random images with children's faces I didn't recognize, all with those same solid black eyes. That's when I heard Mrs. Patterson's voice behind me. "Ranger Janet, we're ready to start the program." I turned around, and there they were. 30 children in neat rows, 3 adults supervising, all smiling at me expectantly. But something was wrong with their faces. The proportions were off, eyes too large, mouths too wide, skin stretched tight like masks. Where did you come from?" I stammered. "The bus, of course," said Mrs. Patterson, but her voice echoed like she was speaking from inside a cave. "The children are so excited to learn about Alaska wildlife." I looked past them, but there was still no bus in the parking area. "Let's head to the trail," I said, because I didn't know what else to do. Maybe if I got through the program quickly, I could get everyone out safely before whatever was happening got worse. But as we walked toward the trail entrance, I noticed the children weren't casting shadows, even though the morning sun was bright and low. At Station 1, I showed the children the rabbit tracks surrounded by stone circles. They gathered around eagerly, pointing and asking questions, but their voices all sounded exactly the same, like one person speaking through 30 different mouths. "These tracks were made by a snowshoe hare," I explained, trying to keep my voice steady. "See how the back feet land in front of the front feet when they hop?" Right on cue, a rabbit hopped out of the bushes. But this rabbit was wrong. Its fur was patchy and gray, hanging in strips from its rotting flesh. One eye socket was empty, and its movements were jerky, unnatural, like a marionette being controlled by someone who didn't quite know how to work the strings. The children clapped and cheered as the decomposing rabbit performed its grotesque dance. But the adult volunteers just stared straight ahead with those too wide smiles, like they couldn't see what was really happening. "Isn't it beautiful, Ranger Janet?" asked the little girl with pigtails. When she smiled, I could see rows and rows of tiny, sharp teeth, like a shark's mouth in a child's face. At Station 2, the dead birds arrived. They perched on branches above us, ravens with exposed rib cages, jays with no feathers, and black liquid dripping from their beaks, ptarmigan with their necks twisted backward at impossible angles. The children oohed and ahed as the corpse birds spread their skeletal wings and cawed with voices like rusted metal scraping against stone. "These birds represent the different species we have in Alaska," I said, my voice cracking. I was reading from a script now, going through the motions while my mind screamed at me to run. Mrs. Patterson nodded approvingly, but when she turned her head, I could see right through her skull to the forest behind. She was hollow inside, just skin stretched over nothing. At Station 3, I tried to rush through the bear lesson. I couldn't let the children see those tar-filled tracks with their fragments of human bones. But the children had already found them. "Look, Ranger Janet," called the red-haired boy, "the bears left us presents." All 30 children were kneeling around the tracks, reaching their hands into the black tar and pulling out tiny bones. They held up finger bones and tooth fragments like they were precious treasures, giggling as the tar dripped between their fingers. "These are our bones," said a girl I hadn't noticed before. From when we came here the first time. That's when I understood. These weren't real children. These were the children who had disappeared over the years in this forest. The ones whose cases were filed under animal attack, or accidental death, or lost to exposure. They were still here, still trapped, and they were trying to add 30 more to Genteristo, their collection. I heard real voices then, confused and frightened. Somewhere nearby, the actual school group was lost in the forest, calling for help. I ran toward the real voices, leaving the ghost children behind. I found Mrs. Patterson and her class huddled together about 50 yards off the main trail, surrounded by trees that definitely hadn't been there that morning. The forest was shifting around them, rearranging itself into a maze with no way out. "Ranger Janet," Mrs. Patterson called when she saw me. "Thank God, we've been walking in circles for an hour. The trail just disappeared." The real children were crying. Several had scratches on their arms and faces from pushing through branches that seemed to grab at them. Their clothes were torn, and they were shivering in the unnatural cold. "Stay close to me," I told them. "We're going to walk straight back to the parking area." But every direction I led them, we ended up back in the same clearing. The forest was alive around us, actively working to keep us trapped. And I could hear the ghost children getting closer, their laughter echoing from every direction. That's when I remembered the stories Jim Crawford had told me about this area. Stories the Park Service didn't want in any official reports. In 1993, a forest fire had swept through Whispering Pines. But that wasn't the whole truth. Before the fire, there had been disappearances. Children from local tribes, then kids from Fairbanks, then entire families. The fire wasn't a natural disaster, 19teen. It was deliberately set to try to contain something that had been feeding in these woods for decades. The fire didn't stop it, it just made it hungrier. The ghost children appeared between the trees, surrounding us. 30 pale figures with black eyes and sharp teeth, reaching out with hands that ended in claws. "Join us, new friends," they sang in unison. "Stay and play forever. Learn about the animals. Learn about feeding. Learn about hunting." The real children pressed against me, sobbing in terror. Mrs. Patterson was praying in a whisper. The parent volunteers had gone into shock, just staring at the approaching circle of predatory spirits. I pulled out the emergency flare from my pack, standard equipment for all rangers. If I could create enough light and noise, maybe I could disrupt whatever force was keeping us trapped. I fired the flare into the air, and for a moment, the red light illuminated the forest exactly as it should be. I could see the real trail, leading straight back to the parking area. "Run!" I screamed. "Follow the trail, don't look back." We ran through the forest as the ghost children shrieked behind us. Their voices turned inhuman, becoming the sounds of every predator in Alaska: bear roars, wolf howls, the scream of a mountain cat. The trees clawed at us as we passed, trying to hold us back. But we made it to the parking area. The school bus was there, engine running, driver looking confused and worried. "Where have you been?" he asked. "You were supposed to be back an hour ago." We drove back to town in silence. The children were traumatized, the adults were in shock, and I was trying to figure out how to report what had actually happened. I submitted my incident report that evening. I told the truth. The spring, all of it. The ghost children, the shifting forest, the ancient predator that had been feeding in Whispering Pines for generations. 3 days later, I was called into Linda's office, along with a federal psychologist and 2 men in expensive suits who didn't give their names. "Ranger Martinez," Linda said carefully, "your report indicates you experienced severe psychological distress during the school program. Environmental isolation can cause hallucinations and paranoid thinking." "I know what I saw," I said. The psychologist leaned forward. "Janet, you've been under a lot of stress. 14 years in wilderness work, several traumatic body recoveries, minimal social contact. These symptoms are more common than you think." "What about the children? What about Mrs. Patterson?" "They saw it too." One of the men in suits spoke for the first time. "The school group reported getting lost on an unfamiliar trail system. There's no mention of any supernatural encounters in their statements. They'd gotten to them first. Convinced them it was group hysteria, stress reaction, misremembered trauma. Standard procedure for covering up things that can't be explained in official reports." The Whispering Pines Trail is being closed indefinitely for environmental restoration, Linda said. You're being transferred to the visitor center in Denali. Desk duty, no field work. They didn't fire me, but they made sure I'd never be alone in the wilderness with children again. They were right to do it. I've been working the Denali Visitor Center for 6 months now. I answer questions about hiking permits and camping regulations. I give presentations to tour groups about wildlife safety. I pretend that everything I learned in 14 years of fieldwork is still valid. But late at night, when I'm closing up the center, I get phone calls on the emergency line. Children's voices, calling for Ranger Janet, asking when we're going to finish the nature program. They want to show me what they've learned about the animals. They want to teach me about hunting. Last week, I got a call from Jim Crawford. 3 more children had disappeared near the Whispering Pines area. Their parents said they were going on a nature walk to visit the friendly ranger who teaches about animals. The search teams found their backpacks arranged in a perfect circle around the old Station 3 location. Each backpack contained a single item, a small bone, carved with symbols that don't match any known human writing. The official report listed it as a bear attack. Case closed. But I know the truth. Something ancient lives in the Alaskan wilderness. Something that learned long ago that the best way to hunt humans is to pretend to help them. It takes children because they're trusting, because they believe adults who wear uniforms and speak with authority. I was its hunting dog, leading prey right into its territory. For 14 years, I helped it feed. And somewhere in the forest near Whispering Pines, 30 more ghost children are waiting for the next school group to arrive. They're practicing their lessons about Alaska wildlife. They're learning new ways to hunt. They're getting hungry again. If you're ever in Alaska and you see signs for educational nature programs in remote areas, turn around and go home. The things that live in our forests have learned that the best way to catch their prey is to offer to teach them something. Some lessons you don't survive. My name is Elena Rodriguez, and I've been the head of search and rescue operations for Glacier Bay National Park for 12 years. I started as a ranger right out of college, working my way up through wilderness training, emergency medical certification, and crisis management courses. I've pulled lost hikers from freezing rivers, rappelled down cliff faces to reach injured climbers, and coordinated helicopter rescues in zero-visibility blizzards. In my line of work, every minute counts, and I've seen what happens when we're too late. But what happened last spring during the Amy Peterson case changed everything I thought I knew about the wilderness I've called home for over a decade. Our search and rescue station sits at the edge of Glacier Bay, a concrete building filled with radios, maps, and emergency equipment. We have GPS units, thermal imaging cameras, emergency medical supplies, and 2 of the best tracking dogs in Alaska. My team consists of 4 experienced rangers and myself, each with at least 8 years of wilderness rescue experience. We work in 12-hour shifts during peak season, monitoring radio channels and responding to emergency calls from across the park's 3 million acres. The call came in on a Tuesday morning in early May. A family camping near Thunder Creek reported their 8-year-old daughter missing. Amy Peterson had wandered off around sunset the previous evening while her parents were setting up camp. The temperature had dropped below freezing overnight, and she'd been missing for 12 hours by the time they called us. In Alaska, that's a death sentence for a child without proper gear. I assembled my best team immediately. Rangers Torres, Kim, Martinez, and Jackson, all veterans with flawless rescue records. We loaded our ATVs with emergency medical supplies, thermal blankets, and enough gear for a 2-day search if needed. Our tracking dogs, Bear and Scout, are German shepherds trained specifically for finding lost people. They've never failed to pick up a scent trail when we had a starting point. The Peterson family had been camping in a designated area about 15 miles from our station. When we arrived, Amy's mother was hysterical, and her father kept pacing around their campsite, calling his daughter's name. They showed us Amy's sleeping bag, which still carried her scent strongly. The last place they'd seen her was near the creek bank, where she'd gone to wash her hands before dinner. Thunder Creek runs fast and cold, fed by glacier melt from the mountains. The water temperature stays just above freezing, even in summer. If Amy had fallen in, she wouldn't have survived an hour. But there were no signs of disturbance at the water's edge, no wet footprints or disturbed mud that would indicate she'd slipped. Bear and Scout picked up Amy's scent immediately from her sleeping bag. Both dogs started tracking along the creek bank, heading toward the dense forest that stretches for hundreds of miles in every direction. Their behavior was normal at first, focused, methodical, following the invisible trail only they could detect. The scent led us away from the water and into the trees, exactly where parents fear their children might wander. After following the trail for about 2 miles, Ranger Torres called out from ahead of us. He'd found Amy's bright red jacket hanging from a tree branch, about 8 feet off the ground. The jacket was clean, undamaged, and still smelled like Amy. But there was no way an 8-year-old could have reached that height, even by climbing. The tree had no low branches, and the bark showed no scratch marks from climbing attempts. I radioed back to base to report our progress, while my team examined the area around the tree. Bear and Scout were getting agitated, whining and pulling at their leashes in different directions. These dogs are trained to stay calm and focused, but something was making them nervous. The scent trail continued, deeper into the woods, but now it seemed mixed with something else, something that made our professionally trained animals uncomfortable. Ranger Torres found the first set of footprints in a muddy patch about 50 yards from the jacket tree. Amy's small sneaker prints were clear in the soft earth, but alongside them were much larger prints. They looked human-shaped but wrong somehow. The proportions were off, too long, too narrow, with spaces between the toes that didn't match any boot or shoe I'd ever seen. The stride length showed something with legs longer than any human could have. "What do you think made these?" Torres asked, taking photos with his camera. I'd seen bear prints, wolf tracks, and every other animal in this park. But these were different. They had 5 toes like human feet, but were nearly twice the size of my boots. The depth in the mud suggested something heavy, much heavier than a child, but not quite heavy enough for an adult human of the size those feet would require. We followed the mixed trail for another mile, with Bear and Scout becoming more agitated with each step. They kept looking back at us, whining, like they were trying to warn us about something dangerous ahead. I'd worked with these dogs for 3 years, and I'd never seen them act this way during a search. That's when we heard Amy calling for help. Her voice came from a dense thicket about 100 yards ahead of us, clear and desperate. "Help me! I'm scared! I can't find my mom and dad!" It was definitely a child's voice, definitely distressed, and it was coming from exactly where our trail was leading us. "Amy," I called back. "Stay where you are. We're coming to get you." We pushed through the underbrush toward her voice, fighting through branches and thorny bushes. The dogs were pulling backward on their leashes now, actively trying to retreat, but we could hear Amy crying and calling for help just ahead. When we reached the thicket where her voice had been coming from, we found nothing. Just more strange footprints in the soft ground and broken branches where something large had moved through. "Help me!" Amy's voice called again, but now it was coming from our left, about 50 yards away through the trees. I split my team up to cover more ground. Rangers Kim and Martinez took the dogs and headed toward the new voice location, while Torres, Jackson, and I spread out to search the immediate area. For the next hour, we heard Amy calling from different locations, sometimes 2 or 3 places at once. But every time we reached where her voice had been coming from, she was never there. Ranger Kim radioed in with a strange report. He'd spotted movement through the trees and saw what looked like Amy running ahead of them. When he called out to her, the figure turned around, and he got a clear look at the face. It was Amy's face, the same blonde hair, same blue eyes, same pink t-shirt from the family photos. But something was wrong with the features. The eyes were too large, the mouth too wide, and when it smiled at him, the expression was too knowing for an 8-year-old child. "It waved at me," Kim reported over the radio, his voice shaky, like it was playing a game. Then it ran deeper into the forest. Over the next hour, each of my team members reported seeing Amy in different locations. Torres saw her climbing a tree with impossible agility. Martinez spotted her standing motionless beside a boulder, watching him from a distance. Jackson found small footprints leading to a cliff edge where no child could have survived a fall. But when he looked over the edge, there was nothing below but jagged rocks and a 40-foot drop. Multiple versions of the missing child were leading us in circles through the wilderness. Each sighting seemed designed to split us up, to draw us away from each other and deeper into areas where radio communication became spotty. I realized we were being hunted, not by an animal, but by something that understood our procedures and was using them against us. I called for helicopter support to search from above and coordinate our ground efforts. The pilot, Jenny Walsh, had been flying rescue missions in Alaska for 15 years. If anyone could spot a lost child from the air, it was her. The helicopter arrived within 30 minutes, and Jenny began systematic grid searches while maintaining radio contact with our ground team. "I've got eyes on a small figure near a cliff face, about 2 miles northeast of your position," Jenny reported. "It looks like a child, and it's not moving much. Possible injury or exhaustion." We hiked toward the coordinates Jenny provided, staying together this time despite the voices calling to us from other directions. The sounds were getting more sophisticated. Now we heard not just Amy's voice, but her parents calling for her, and even our own voices echoing back to us from impossible directions. When we reached the cliff face location, we found a small cave hidden behind some fallen rocks. Inside, unconscious but breathing, was the real Amy Peterson. She was hypothermic but alive, wrapped in what looked like animal fur that didn't match any species native to Alaska. Her core temperature was dangerously low, but she was responsive when we warmed her up with emergency heat packs. "A nice lady found me," Amy said weakly as we prepared her for helicopter evacuation. "She kept me warm and brought me water and berries. She said people would come looking for me and I should wait here." Amy described the woman as changing appearance constantly, sometimes tall, sometimes short, different faces, different hair colors. According to Amy, the woman could look like anyone she wanted to look like. "She showed me pictures of you," Amy said, looking directly at me. "She knew you were coming to find me." As we carried Amy toward the helicopter landing zone, we kept hearing voices, calling from the forest around us. The voices sounded exactly like our own team members, but we were all accounted for and staying together. Something was mimicking our voices with perfect accuracy, trying to separate us from the group one final time. Ranger Martinez heard his own voice calling for help from a ravine and instinctively started walking toward it before I grabbed his arm. "That's not you," I told him, even though the voice was identical in every way. Same accent, same speech patterns, even the same concern he'd shown for Amy earlier. I ordered everyone to maintain visual contact and ignore any voices that weren't coming from people we could see. The fake voices became more desperate and convincing as we approached the helicopter. We heard Amy's parents calling for their daughter, but they were back at base camp 20 miles away. We heard Jenny the pilot calling for assistance, but she was visible in the helicopter above us. The voice mimicry was perfect, exact emotional tones, personal details that only we would know, even inside jokes between team members. Whatever was creating these voices had been watching us and learning our patterns for much longer than just this search. As the helicopter lifted off with Amy secured inside, I looked back toward the forest one final time. Multiple figures were watching us from the tree line, men, women, children, all with different appearances but moving in perfect unison. They stood motionless until the helicopter was out of sight, then melted back into the shadows like they'd never been there. Amy recovered fully and was reunited with her family. They never learned the full details of what we encountered during the search. My official report described a successful rescue operation with challenging terrain and weather conditions. No mention of the entity that had protected their daughter and tried to lead us astray. But Amy's drawings from her therapy sessions tell a different story. She draws pictures of a woman with many different faces, all smiling kindly. She says the nice lady visits her dreams and promises to see her again someday. Child psychologists call it trauma processing, but I know better. Since that rescue, we've had multiple reports of hikers seeing family members who couldn't possibly be there. Spouses on solo trips, children on adults-only expeditions, deceased relatives walking ahead on the trail. Lost children are found with stories of helpful strangers who looked exactly like their parents, leading them to safety before disappearing. Whatever saved Amy is still in those woods, and it's learning to imitate more people every year. Sometimes I wonder if it's protecting lost travelers or collecting them. Amy was returned safely, but others haven't been so fortunate. We've had disappearances where the scent trails lead nowhere, where our best tracking dogs refuse to follow, and where the only evidence left behind is footprints that don't match any human foot. I still work, search, and rescue, but I've changed our protocols. We never split up during searches anymore, no matter what voices we hear calling for help. We ignore any communication that doesn't come from visible team members. And we always trust what our dogs are telling us, even when their fear doesn't make logical sense. Because in the wilderness of Glacier Bay, logic isn't always enough to keep you safe. Sometimes the thing that wants to help you home isn't entirely human. And sometimes the face looking back at you from the forest shadows is wearing features that belong to someone you love, but with eyes that have seen far too much to belong to any mortal being. The search and rescue business teaches you that not everyone who goes missing wants to be found. But Amy Peterson's case taught me something else entirely. Sometimes the things that find you first aren't looking to bring you home at all.